Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Welcome back, everyone, to Lit Happens. We are now up to episode 42. And joining me this morning, we have Belle. Good morning, Belle. How are we?
Good morning, Adriel. Doing well. Ready to get into it. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I am
Just
ready
running
as
off
well,
the back
ready
of
to
the
talk.
exams. Yes.
Yeah, true, 100%. Ready to talk through some of the new syllabus stuff, getting into the specifics this morning. So we're going to be looking at the advanced reading to write course moving into 2026. Goodness me, 2026. Already talking about that.
Oh, I know.
Definitely getting older by the day. It's wild. But yeah, look, I think we should just start off with our little quit for today, and we're going to be quite topical this morning. And we're looking at our HSC paper that our kids have just sat. Now, this is going to be a week after this episode being released, but I guess the teachers will still be thinking about it then. And those that are doing HSC marking will be starting off that journey for this year. But yeah, Belle, let's start off with our little quit. English paper 1 for the HSC 2025. Lit or quit?
Interesting one. I haven't been able to see the entire paper, but obviously with all the collegial discussion going on and things that students have said, it was quite a dense paper 1, which I think probably threw a lot of them off, because usually there's a bit of a build up. There's the visual, there's probably a shorter like poem type text, and then you might get into 1 or 2 extracts that might be a page or a couple pages. So it sounds like this year they completely cut out the visual component. Is that right, Adriel?
That is correct. They had a interesting mark structure. It was 3, 4, 4, 4, and 5. And if I'm correct, they looked at it was very text heavy. So I think it was like a memoir, 2 non-fiction extracts, and 1 poem that the kids had. So like you mentioned, no visual text, which I was talking about this with one of my colleagues recently being reflecting on the exam, and we were saying, well, what's the use of studying visual techniques if they're not going to test it in the final examination, through the HSC course. We always have these what if or what's the use questions. I guess Nessa chooses what Nessa wants, and we need to abide by it. But when I first heard the kids actually come out of the exam, they were speaking about like the non-fiction extracts, or sir, there was heaps of reading. Then I had a quick look at some of them. They were actually only like a paragraph or 2 long, so it wasn't like it was copious amounts of reading. But I think just the fact that they didn't have the option of a visual text to answer or respond to, was definitely something that the kids probably didn't.
And 5 questions is quite a lot too, because if you totally 5 questions is quite a lot too, because if you don't, sometimes when you have the longer marker comparison question, you're working with the text that you kind of already probably answered previously, but this is like completely new questions, completely new texts. I can see how it really threw them, and they had to just go next one. It seems like there was not really much breathing room in that 45 minutes, which, look, considering we're year 7 or something, or year 6 into
so we started
into text and human experience.
It's the 7th year now. 7th.
So I mean, just in that regard, I can see why it was a more difficult I guess, paper. I always feel for the kids who are later down the track in these prescriptions, because they kind of pay for it a little bit, just with the fact that I guess there's already been multiple exams and there's lots of practice papers. I know there's pros and cons for both, but realistically, that they are sitting this for their first and only time as well. So I think it's the nature of, we've seen it before, right? As the prescriptions progress, the papers become more difficult, more dense. The questions become a lot more conceptual and unique, which is, maybe we can talk about the paper 1 essay question then leading into that. So what were your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I thought this was definitely interesting, and we've sort of discussed this off air. I thought paper 1 overall was more difficult than the second paper, which we'll probably divulge a little bit about next week. But the question was quite abstract, I would say, and
yes,
it was that one question. It wasn't a text-specific question for the common module essay question, but it was to do with the enduring nature of the human spirit. Now, like, already things come to mind if you were looking at texts like Billy Elliot. You can probably also look at something like Merchant of Venice in advanced English, which would work well. However, some of the other texts like 1984, good luck to think about that on the spot for teachers. And we know that that's quite a popular text as well. I don't know what Nessa was doing. Maybe they're throwing people off, but I guess if the kid's done that well, they definitely stand out. But the enduring nature of the human spirit, I thought that was quite interesting. So how does the text actually enrich that? That was the verb, enrich. And we sort of we're looking at that. It's funny actually to say that. I had a bunch of Year 12 kids come in as I was teaching my new Year 12 kids, the exam, and they were like, "Oh, sir, like this is what the question was," and I was like, "Okay, let's do a bit of a learning sort of thing here." Where I got the kids to sort of tell me what the question was and whatnot, and we looked at how it sort of linked to the syllabus, and just to sort of alleviate some of their stresses. We're like, "Okay, did you talk about this? Did you talk about that?" And most of them that were pre-prepared. Goodness, I can't speak. They definitely found ways to adapt their responses, whereas some of the students that may not have been as prepared and went in with a bit of extra faith in their ability.
I would say good way of putting it. I love that phrase. That's awesome. Great way of putting it, Adriel. Yeah.
I think they definitely struggled a bit more. But yeah, look, paper 1 was definitely difficult. Lit or quit, I would say quit if I was a student. Lit if I was a teacher wanting to challenge the students.
Challenge, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Lit from a teacher's perspective, I think it was the type of paper that makes the students really try and think, and that kind of essay question, I think you're right. It was really abstract. It's really getting them to conceptualize the human experience rubric. So even to appreciate their text. So for me, there's a big emphasis in that question, the way that it's phrased on storytelling and representation. So I think students that kind of led with the big universal, human qualities and big universal experiences, and then use their text and characters as the vehicle in which we see that represented for a variety of audiences. You're right. This is where your stronger students who are super prepared will shine, particularly students who practiced a variety of question types and not just straight rubric types. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how this translates in the marking. I would love to be part of that marking center for this question, because I can only imagine the types of conversations that would take place, right, when they're creating their pilot scripts and whether they do that pilot marking for their core scripts and stuff.
Of course, the senior markers will definitely be well underway in about a day or two, I think. So it'll be interesting if you've got colleagues that are in that center. It'll be interesting to sort of get some of the dialogue after they've done it. I don't know if they're allowed to talk too much about it prior to this, but afterwards it's good to pick their brains. It's definitely one of the best learning tools. I know I'll be head down soon in the midst of it. Not as a senior marker because that's well above my pay grade, and I would say, but just just enjoying it. And I like how you sort of mentioned there. It'll be interesting to pick the brains of those that are in these centers, looking at the way they do approach the questions. I like when I often see these types of questions, which are quite generic and do support some texts more than others. I would hope that they mark it a little bit more leniently for texts that, overall, in a way, just because it's, gives a disadvantage or an unfair advantage to text that it may fit well with. I don't know. Honestly, I think we're getting too much to the point now where we just over critique or analyze things, and sometimes we get in our heads. So
and perhaps
perhaps
that's where the markers are like, you know what, it's a lot more simpler than that. We're being real English teachers about this. I think so.
That's right.
I think so.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we'll soon find out.
That's a lot of.
So,
yeah. That's a lot of discussion there, and I'm sure you guys are having plenty of discussion with both your colleagues and your students.
Yes.
Bill, how about we get into our episode for today, and we'll start off by looking at a few different questions in regards to advanced English reading to write specifically. So that's what today's episode is going to be on. I know we've done an episode on the old reading to write courses, and we've given like a little bit of a general overview of what teachers will be looking forward to moving into 2026. But let's move into our first sort of part of exploring the 2026 advanced reading to write unit. What is it all about?
Well, I think, Adriel, you and I felt it was really important that in our episodes where we're focusing on the new syllabus, we try to get into the specific courses so that we could make some, more specific suggestions about approaches, text types, a lot of things that you and I are going to be rehashing and repurposing that we think fit nicely anyway, so we don't reinvent the wheel. I think the beauty with the fact that it's still reading to write is, almost all your previous reading to write units can be used. They will need to be rejigged though, just to fit the specific outcomes and content points. But the other big thing is, I think some schools might need to make changes to their prelims because of what the new Year 12 text will be. Because I know of many people at many schools where there are some texts that they teach in their prelim which have made it back onto the HSC list, and they must swap that with something else. So what we were hoping in this episode was to cover a bit of that, get into some more specific examples, some suggestions, throw some ideas out there. We'd love to hear ideas from our listeners too. But essentially, the rubric has the same spirit, I think, as the one that we are currently doing and we are used to. But many people who have ventured on and looked at the actual syllabus will see that the rubric is much more simplified now. As they all are. It's virtually just, a paragraph. So when we're looking at it, it says students undertake the intensive and close reading of quality texts from a range of modes and mediums, develop knowledge to appreciate, interpret, analyze, and evaluate texts to convey complex ideas, relationships, endeavors, and scenarios. So this to me sounds like a really condensed version of the current reading to write rubric that we're all looking at. So essentially it's covering specifically quality text, which we know is a big component of the new stage 6 syllabus. It's a prerequisite that schools are covering quality text, that they're covering a range of modes and mediums. So I think it's really key to note that with the new syllabus now, this is a transition to English Advanced, transition to English Standard. So very much I think it's trying to represent like the bones of what we're trying to teach and the skills in general that we're trying to teach through the rubrics and texts as vehicles, as opposed to we need to know our text inside and out, and that's the most important thing. I think with the new syllabus, and we've seen that in the junior as well, right? We need to know our text, but it's the vehicle of which we can see English and see the textual concepts and engage with the English skills. So, yeah, I feel like that paring it back is not so much about the nitty-gritty of a rubric, but more about what is the overall aim and goal that we have for senior English. Yeah.
I think when we look at the reading to write unit, like you look at that title or transition to, senior English there, it's about building that skill base and that foundation for students to definitely move forward. I know in particular, I'm glad that they are putting a focus on this, because if we were to just have it content heavy, you are not addressing the skills that the students will be needing moving into the HSC course at the end of that year. So I think by condensing the rubric or the prescriptions or the statements there into one or two really meaning-packed sentences and phrases there, I think it's very good for us as teachers. And I know you probably unpack this in a bit, but when we're looking at the responding and the understanding sort of outcomes moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. But I think the big thing for our listeners and our teachers here is this, and over the years, I've fallen guilty of this as well, where we become so passionate about maybe wanting to teach one singular text, or getting involved in something that we found passionate, which I don't see there any issue being with that. But you have to understand that the first part of year 11 is about building the skills, the foundations that the students will need moving into the rest of their senior study. Now, we can assume and infer that these skills have been developed, and hopefully through good backward mapping and planning in your junior grades, some people will be well equipped for this. But let's be honest, there is this big jump that students have between year 10 and year 11 when it comes to their maturity. So, the development of their frontal lobe and all that sort of stuff occurs during that magical term between 10 and 11, where kids start to understand the importance of why they're choosing to be in senior school. And when they start to understand that, then they start to realize, oh my goodness, I have not done enough prerequisite work. And I think this transition to senior English course now will definitely get that. And I think that's what NESA is starting to see now, with their development of these modules, becoming more refined and skill-based. So it's a lot more nuanced in terms of developing the skills. And it's a good thing to tell your students. Like I know I've been telling my students over the last few years is prelims. Yes, it's nice to get good marks in your prelims course, but for me as a teacher, my focus is not on your marks that you receive. It's on how well you develop your skills. So come day one of year 12, we are ready to go for what really matters.
Absolutely.
And I think, this unit definitely does help with that. I don't know, like those are probably some of those critical takeaways.
No, I agree. I agree completely, because I think as well, when you look at it that way, it's about what reading skills do we need to then have good writing skills, and the relationship between them. That good writers, and this is something that we've been looking at in our old syllabus too, is good writers are well read. They read perceptively, they read thoughtfully, they read critically, and therefore they write well. And also that, relationship where, to be a good reader as well, you need to practice your writing. Like those things go hand in hand. So I think that emphasis of the relationship between reading and writing is there still, but it's definitely, I think, like you said, much more of what are the underlying skills that are needed there? Because when you're looking at this condensed rubric, I can see how it's picked up a little bit of what was in the common module of year 12 and a little bit of like what's in module C. And they've paired that back to what are the generics, the general skills and textual concepts, as opposed to specific maybe content ideas. And I feel like they've used that to, really create this new refined rubric. And I know that we're going to later talk about how that might play out and some suggestions and ideas, but I really think, it's about getting the kids to, in this term, just go over those skills and look at it with that senior perspective. I mean, because if you look at this for the advanced, you've still got some strong terms and words here. So you've got respond perceptively. Okay. So we probably need to do some activities then where we determine how we can do close reading and perceptive analysis, and definitely conversation and discussion about that to enhance perceptive ideas and thought processes. And even if you're looking at the writing, it's thoughtful writing. So we're writing here with real purpose and with real intent, and then judicious reflection. So I think this is where, if you look at the other reading to write rubrics for the other courses, you can see that change in language. And I would really say for teachers teaching advanced, especially if it's your first time, take particular note of those terms. You need to understand the level that's needed to hit that choice of word, and then making sure that your students understand that as well. And then using that to develop that deep insight.
I think you're so right. Like it's something that teachers, especially newer teachers and even older teachers that have been teaching this a while, it's a nice way to sort of reflect on maybe some of our focuses in terms of the way we plan our activities for this.
Yes.
I know that we sort of discussed this last episode where, we spoke about things not being as heavily scaffolded when we were in school compared to the way we scaffold our work now. The teacher sort of would be like, here's the work, off you go, do it yourself, which, did foster critical thinking for us, because the sink or swim when it came to our learning. But what I'm trying to sort of say here is, as a new teacher or as a more experienced teacher, I think this unit is also asking us as teachers to refine our writing and work on our writing with the students, because we need to demonstrate that skill of reading to write, not just reading and telling kids this is what you go and do. It's activities that will encourage reading on both parts. So a lot of those writing workshop activities where, at our school, at my current school where I'm teaching, we've got this idea of like, I do, we do, and then you do. I think it's like one of those. I may have got it wrong. I apologize to anyone that's part of the EDI framework there, but it's along those principles there, where I think it's that guided practice. That's the word. Which kids will really flourish with in this day and age. And I mean, it's good for you as a teacher to actually work on your writing as well. As much as, you might say to me, Adriel, but it's like we're just so time poor, and I just want to sort of mention this. That is the fundamental reason why you are teaching. You love English. You want kids to love English. You want to inspire kids to do well in English. And these are those building blocks for that, and sometimes we can say yes or no to some of those admin stuff that can just give the flick. I apologize, Nessa, if you're listening, but let's do the important things. Let's do the important things in our teaching practice and pedagogy that definitely help us. And I think, this reading to write unit is really encouraging that moving forward into 2026. But in saying that, though, let's move on, Belle. I know we've got plenty to talk about.
We do.
What outcomes guide the advanced reading to write unit? So what are the outcomes like, and what are these skills that we've been harping on about?
Yeah, sure. So just quickly, we do have the new 6 outcomes here. All 6 outcomes are represented within the advanced reading to write transition rubric. So they're all represented, and then they're fleshed out more specifically in the understanding and responding, which we'll get to shortly. But when we're looking at them in year 11, they're all about analyzing, composing, and the last one is evaluating. And then that language does shift when you get to the year 12 outcomes. So again, we can see how there's a transition from year 11 skills in year 11 advanced, and then how they get even stronger for year 12. But basically, we're looking at outcome 1, which is all about analyzing form, structure, and language. So that within your program, you need to have some activities that encourage and guide students to be able to do that themselves as well. You've got the second outcome, which is all about like context and perhaps even intertextual connections. So I know we're going to talk about different ways to engage these outcomes, so I'll leave that for the next question. But then we've got outcome 3, which is about the values represented with the text and the audience connection and response here. And then your 4 and 5 is all about composition. So outcome 4 is composes text using forms and features in new and different contexts. Outcome 5 is about critical and creative text for a range of purposes. And then your last one, your outcome 6, is about reflection. So this evaluation of compositional choices where a student reflects on their own writing. So even as the outcomes progress, you can see they're kind of, they're analyze, which you often do when you're reading the text. And then they're the actual composition and evaluation when you're writing the text. So there's almost that nice, transition from reading to writing, even within the way that the outcomes are numbered here, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah. And do you want to expand a little bit on to how they sort of overlay with the Year 12 course then? And we're probably going to be speaking a little bit about the craft of writing later on in one of those episodes, but how do these outcomes sort of move into or help transition the students into the Year 12 outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at the outcomes for year 12, I'm just going to get the table in front of me real quick. So when we're looking at the transition, you'll see that the spirit of those outcomes is the same, but you'll see that the descriptors change and get a lot stronger.
Yeah.
So I've got to find them in here. I'll get to that in a sec. But really what we see happening with the outcomes here is it's about the skills, and very much you can see the textual concepts making a representation within these outcomes as well. Yeah. So,
I think,
you can see how.
Yeah, I think when you look at like the outcomes between the 11 and 12, one of the key things that teachers will realize is the first verb changes. So, for example, you'll look at the first one, which is like an analysis for year 11. So we're building that fundamental skill of analysis, and then year 12 then transitions towards like that critical analysis. I think that's, so now we're looking at it more with that nuanced perspective. Right. I know we've had an episode where we've discussed this. And then as you move down the tree, which I love because there's only like 6 outcomes. So it's very simplified.
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
Very much so simplified. Yeah. You look at that verb again, and it's no longer evaluation. No longer analysis. By the last one, which remains pretty much the same. Outcome 6 remains the same. Every other outcome has transitioned from an analysis to an evaluation. And you will note this. I had this question, and the only reason I sort of bring this up is as part of this old unit. One of my students actually asked me the other day. They're like, "Sir, if a question in your HSC or even in Mod C or whichever module that they're doing, even reading to write here, asks for an analysis in year 12, what would you recommend we sort of move towards?" And my straight first thing is I'll say, look at those 3 dot points at the top of each of your exam questions, which you will be marked on. And you will note that even though the question says analysis, the marking criteria will 100%, I guarantee you, as teachers, it will say evaluates.
Yes.
Which can throw students off, So that is that outcome transition. So it's important for our teachers here, to really, really understand that you are building analysis skills in the 11 for them to then move on to more of an evaluation or evaluative approach to looking at these texts, which is that, transition that we're sort of looking at. Yeah.
That's a great point. And I think in year 11, you want to develop the kids to be able to independently analyze. And then you as the teacher, maybe when you're workshopping or you're discussing or you're doing the guided approaches, maybe you're starting to foster that evaluative thinking. But for now, there's less pressure there. That's what we're building towards. As long as your students note that that's where we're going, and you're spending that whole 3 terms slowly fostering that, so that when they get into year 12, the students are aware of what's required of them when evaluating, and now they are formulating that skill of their own evaluation. Absolutely. And it progresses that way across all the courses, which I think is really good. But if you're someone who you've only looked at them in isolation and you haven't backward mapped, you might miss that. So this is why it's really important. Like we constantly say, Adriel and I constantly say, we do need to backward map. You need to be decisive on what you're doing in year 12 to then inform, because you can see how just even in the outcomes, it's so tightly connected, year 12 and year 11. You can't just whatever I do in year 11 and then I'll do something new for year 12. You can do that, I guess, but it's not going to pay off as well as if you, and I know it takes a lot of time, and I know we're time poor, but if we're looking at the best outcomes for the students, it's making sure that there's that deep connection between the year 12 and year 11 course for sure.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Alrighty, let's move on to our next question here, Bill, which probably carries on from what we are speaking about here.
Yes.
How did the students learn through core content focus and understanding and responding?
Yeah, so, everyone who's had a look at the new syllabus now can see that not only do they have the little rubric for each unit or each term's module, but now they've got I guess like your outcome content points, and they're separated under two headings. You've got your understanding and then you've got your responding. So very much your understanding is like your text engagement and interpretation and analysis. And then the responding is very much your outcomes, like 3, 4, and so forth, because it's about how do students then engage with what they've read. So again, we've got like our end understanding, like what they've been reading and absorbing and taking in, and then the responding as in the writing component. So when we're looking at what we're unpacking here in the understanding, the first one has an emphasis on the aesthetic qualities of the text and the power of language. So to represent ideas and experiences. And I know in the next question, Adriel, you and I are going to talk about some suggestions about how to create units like that. But just for the rubric's sake here and the outcomes here, we're looking at what are the aesthetic qualities. So obviously, depending on what text you pick, your students will need to understand what we mean by aesthetic. And this is where I feel like there is that correlation with Module C. In year 12, Module C is all about the aesthetic qualities of text that we consume, and then text that we then, recreate or create. So they need to know what that is. And then as an extension, this idea of the power of language, which I think is a really cool wording here, because it's all about well, what is then the impact of what is said in this text and what is represented. So to me, that's very like linked to audience, a bit of a link to context here. I think it's a nice use of terms here, the aesthetic and the power of it, because then I think students are actually starting to analyze the text, but possibly starting to get into some interpretations and judgments if they are trying to determine what is the power of this text, what is the impact of it, what are these really interesting stylistic aesthetic qualities. So that's kind of one of the understanding points.
I like how the rubric online Nessa actually have the definition of each of the key terms there as well. So if you're struggling with any other that language, jump on board that Nessa page. I'm sure you're going to mention that as we do move forward there as well. But I think I love the fact that they do have this understanding and responding sort of breakdown. But I'll let you continue going into unpacking the responding.
No, that's really good. No, absolutely. I love it too, because we used to kind of have to map it out ourselves in the previous syllabus and prescriptions. So I think it's really nice that it's streamlined. Like everybody, no matter where you teach or what school or whatever, everybody is really clear on what specifically within that rubric are we teaching. So that's one. Then we've got the relationship between reader, writer, text, and context. So you're looking at the purpose, the audience, the context, the intent of the text, and also reader reception of that text. I think this is especially important for advanced students because, we do then get eventually into like a Module A unit, for example, or a Module B critical study, and students have to have that awareness of the different levels here. So what was the intent of the writer? And then, what was the audience of that time's reception of the text? And then as a new modern audience now, what's my perception or connection or understanding of the text? So I think that's an important one there too. And then in terms of the last couple ones for understanding here, then we've got the analyzing the language features, structures, stylistic choices, perspectives. So see here where we've got a lot of our core textual concept terms coming into play here. And this is where, in your junior years, I know that at my school, we made really sure that across stage 4 and 5, we mapped the textual concepts evenly across the entire stage, and making sure that our assessments assess those textual concepts, because the building of these skills starts in those junior years. Absolutely. So all the hard work that you guys have, done to get your 7 and 10 programs up to the new junior syllabus is, going to have a really big impact on how well students engage with these content points, I think, because you actually have an anchor to go, in year 10, we looked at this particular topic and text to cover, let's say, perspectives in text, or to cover specific context or argument or authority. And I think it's a really good connection to this is what you were doing in junior years to prep you for your senior years. Yeah. And then the other one that makes an appearance here is also conventions of genre.
Yeah.
And the ways text may conform or subvert. So you can see how that's a very advanced link to conventions. Not just what are the conventions, but how are they either supporting or challenging the established norms of either the writer's time and or our modern audiences. Yeah,
No,
so a
100%.
lot there
I
for
like
the
that
understanding.
Yeah, I like that you've mentioned the fact that, kids, black teachers have to pay attention to that little slight sort of rewording there, because we are getting beyond just, like I said, the recalling of the conventions or just a simple explanation. We're looking at how it affects, understanding the shaping of meaning, how text function in terms of mode, style, language, structure, conventions, like we said, specific to medium. So really having that critical lens, which is what we sort of unpacked in that first question that we looked at here. So your activities need to be shaped around this understanding now that that idea of subversion is quite significant for our teachers, especially in the planning process. But yeah, look, I think that's a great little breakdown there, Belle, of those content focuses. Let's look at what types of texts.
Sorry, can I just say one more point about the responding points in this one? So if you note them, like they've got meta language and context and all the usual range of audience and purposes, but the first point is compose persuasive, discursive, imaginative, and reflective texts that experiment. And so here you can see how this transition to senior English is really here to lay the foundation work for module C as well. So, but also I see parts of the human experience common module rubric at play here in terms of the text, the representation, the appreciation. So I think moving forward, I know we're going to talk in the next question, is trying to use your reading to write to have a bit of a common approach, but also make sure it's your bones of your senior module C course as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I like that. And it's definitely something that our teachers do need to keep in mind as we do move into this course here. So let's move on then, Bill, into our next little part here. Wrong question there. What kinds of texts and concepts are suggested for the advanced reading to write course? Now, just before you come in with your wonderful sort of response there, I know we sort of discussed this a little bit last time, where it's like I would avoid having a singular text. We want multiple texts, and I'm sure you're going to sort of go and unpack this a little bit as we do move forward. But if I was to give my 2 cents here to teachers, have a variety of texts, nice and simple, planned into your program. Anyway, keep going, Bill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So off the back of that, because if you're looking at those the content, the outcomes and the understanding and responding content points, you can really see here that there's a lot that has to be done, and that might be really onerous if you've only got one text. So definitely, I definitely think that in this module, a medley of text works really well. because you can have a variety of different text types. That's not to say that you still can't have like a core text. Like if you have, let's say, a prose fiction text, for example, that might be your core, that's fine. Just make sure that you also have a couple of other texts like a poem or a nonfiction text and a couple of those other text types, and they're all connected, like they build to represent what's in the core text as well. And this is where the planning needs to go here, so that you do have that representation. So, you think of short stories, essays, extracts, poems, speeches, visual and digital text work really nicely here. Because this is a transition to to advanced English, it is the perfect space to not only test out all those text types, but get an assessment of where your students are sitting with those text types as well. And so the other thing I think to think about is, because you only then have a module A and module B after this in the prelim course, your common here, reading to write, has to function a little bit like text and human experiences, along with obviously module C. Because this is where I think why you and I are such a big proponent of a variety of text types, because you can use them as potentially related texts and even unseen kind of activities. You can do a lot of your short answer skills and hit the rubric when you're introducing these related texts, and when you're then getting into what might be your core text, or perhaps all of this medley of texts represent your core. That's obviously totally great as well. It just depends on, I guess, what you're doing as a school. Maybe one option for you is to backward map from what you're doing in text and human experience. So let's say if you're doing a novel there, for example, perhaps you want your core text to be a novel along with other texts, so that might be one way. I think it's also good here to have a bit of a hook, like a big, like, how for year 12 for the common, we have human experiences, and that becomes our big kind of topic that we then have a breakdown of. I think it's good to have some kind of concepts that maybe hook your unit, just so your students can actually see the connection between, for example, all your texts that you've picked, or a connection when you're transitioning from the short answer unseen skills to the then reading and analysis skills, to then the writing in all those different text types. Because remember, this isn't a unit where you're just doing an essay or you're just doing creative. It wants you to engage with persuasive, discursive, imaginative, and reflective. And I know that that's kind of a lot to cover, but if we can encourage using this as a taster, I don't think you need to get into the nitty-gritty of all of them here. You might have, for example, imaginative and reflective might be your assessment, so that might take precedence. But you absolutely can do a little bit of discursive here. So you could have one of your medley texts be a discursive article that you have found, and use that. Maybe that supports whatever the core text's big ideas are. So you could do that. You could get your students to transition their imaginatives into more of a discursive piece. There is still options here. I think even though there's specifics in those content points from the outcomes, I can see there's still a lot of options where teachers can look at what they did in year 11 and rehash them. So I'll get into those conceptual hooks in a moment, but I think, Adriel, this is where medleys or a variety, not just one central text, are really important here.
Yeah, I do appreciate that, because like we said, this in essence is a precursor to your Mod C unit later on down the track. And we know that Mod C prescribes that, once again, teachers will look at a rich variety of texts here. So I love this idea of a medley that you're sort of mentioning, with the core text that are prescribed there as well. But look, what are some of those conceptual hooks and maybe some textual suggestions for our teachers? What do you reckon?
Yeah, so I think because this is advanced, you can do a lot of more higher order things here, because you probably have students that are stronger in their reading and writing skills to begin with, but also hopefully excited and engaged and enjoy English. Usually your advanced students are the ones that actually like English, and usually standard is, I don't love English, but I do have tertiary education in mind, so I'm going to do standard. So okay, there are a couple of ways to do this. I think, so I know of some schools who do a bit of a textual concept as their hook or focus. So that might be, for example, voice or voices or representation or perspective. So sometimes that is the anchor or the lens. Sometimes I know schools who focus on a bit of a universal value or idea, and therefore that value and idea is a really nice link up to text and human experience. So it might be something like freedom, or agency or determination or transformation. And then if you're doing that as a central focus, you're looking at a variety of text types that can hit that concept. Separate from that, though, because these are advanced students, you could also do genre as a focus. So like a genre as a ways of thinking, because I know some people who do speculative fiction here or dystopia, so I think this is a really good spot for those types of texts, because in that way you're looking at audience perception. So you might, have certain text ideas. You might be doing a bit of Orwell here. Perhaps you've got some, Atwood. You might be doing your big sci-fi text that used to be on the HSC list and we have access to. So like Brave New World, for example. I think if you're doing genre, there's a nice opportunity here for you to perhaps reuse something and not have to, reinvent the wheel, and just making sure that the text fits, but the activities that you're going to do with it align back to the new content points. Other ones might be, you might have a context focus. So maybe you have contemporary fiction or perhaps Australian fiction, or perhaps you might do something more specific. So like the American Dream. I know that you guys, you've done that with Gatsby, which is really nice as well. You could do war poetry here, civil rights movement. You could look at specific social, cultural, or historical context, and then engage a range of authors and a range of text types that fit within that kind of contextual focus. Maybe two more.
Yep.
I think critical perspectives are good here. I know in the past when I've taught advanced, I've done like a taster or an introduction to critical perspective and lenses. Obviously, there's no point going too in depth, but you could look at different frames as opposed to getting into the nitty gritty of the theories. So you could look at feminist frames. So here you might be looking at feminist voices or, gender representations, and that might be a focus. Post-colonialism is quite good here as well. So you could be looking at culture, identity, power, like think of like Your Heart of Darkness, for example, might work nicely here. Marxist material. So perhaps texts that are about class and social status, that kind of representation. I know there's a bit of an eco-critical now with nature and environment. So I think if you're doing one of these perspectives, you're just encouraging kind of a reading through these lens. You might be comparing some text. You might be actually using the lens to encourage some rewriting and some compositional activities. So I think one more as well is form and composition seems to be one. So you might be looking at, romantic literature or modernist literature, or sonnets, or metaphysical poetry. I know I've done that, maybe not under reading to write, but I've looked at that form before. Free verse, stream of consciousness, Shakespearean sonnets, even some Virginia Woolf might be nice here. So I think what's good here is to consider that, yes, you've got lots of opportunity for advance. And again, if you know that you're going to be covering some of these lenses or contextual time periods in year 12, in your core text in year 12, then perhaps this is where you might backward map and incorporate a similar a similar text or similar idea that that you can use to jog students' memory when you're then doing it in year 12.
I like that idea that, you mentioned. I think it's very important for us to actually introduce these critical perspectives and also look at form and composition in regards to like those different lenses that you mentioned there, because that often gets kids away from the summative approach to a lot of their text and gets them to think perceptively and critically about their texts. And like we were saying at the beginning, since this is an advanced course, this is that thing that sort of distinguishes our advanced candidates compared to our standard candidates. And remember, like reading, this is sort of like the common module of E11, that reading to write unit there. So we are establishing these skills for our students to succeed and stand out when it does come to section 1, paper 1 of the HSC examination later on down the track. as per the common module, which are some of those links that you made. But no, that's some fantastic stuff there. I really like that fact that, critical perspectives are being taught nice and early, and this will be confronting to your students. Even those kids that, like, I know you mentioned, you've got advanced kids that so often will go in because they like English. These days we get a few kids that'll still come in because they're like, oh, people say I'm smart enough to do this, or I want to have like that little bit of a look, I'm doing advanced English approach. But this here will definitely, this sort of approach will definitely get them thinking about, why they're truly doing English advanced. And those are the students that you sort of want when you're teaching the course. I know it can be very difficult at times to tell a student that may be passionate, about maybe one aspect of the English course, to look at it holistically. And I think this definitely gives them a bit of an insight if you do have this sort of approach as to what is expected in the advanced course. And remember, reading to write, it is that first course that they are doing overall in their journey on senior English. So get them ready for what is expected nice and early. Don't spend too long building into it, because we know how quick the half 2 years goes in stage 6. So you just don't have the time to muck around, really. I would say personally, as a teacher, establish these things nice and early. But let's move forward now, Bill. We've got lots of good stuff. What are some key takeaways for our teachers and students that may be listening?
Yeah, I think what you said just on the end there, I'm going to start with that. It is the first advanced course. Usually early on here, we're trying to make sure that students are sitting in the correct English courses. Every English faculty will be having those conversations of our students in the right spot. That's going to, impact on their results positively. So I definitely like how you said, don't take too long to get into it. You want to, I know it's a lot of work, especially at the start of the year, but you want to start strong. I try not to make things too simple or accessible at the beginning, because I do want to set that tone of advanced English. You do have to work, quite hard. It is a challenging course, and that's where the reward comes from. I often try to emphasize that with them. Like, yes, it's challenging. Yes, you might be thinking about things in a way that you hadn't before, and that's the reward of this unit, and that's going to pay off in your responses down the track when you are engaging perceptively. So that for sure is like, don't make them complacent, because you might have trouble later if you need to cull. And let's be honest here, a lot of our public schools are very particular about their numbers, and about class sizes, and about, you only have enough for 5 classes for whatever course it is. So you need to make sure then students are in the right spot so you can allocate classes accordingly. So if you haven't been able to dwindle them off, at the end of year 10 when they're transitioning, then term 1 definitely, because we also don't want students really late swapping. I mean, it's still possible, it's still doable, but I think it's best interest for everyone if they can be in their right course as early as possible. I think the other thing is, like, reading to write. This unit for me is probably the most important unit that they're going to do, because it sets the tone for everything else they're going to study in stage 6 English. So if I'm like really time poor, I want to be putting all my attention on this first unit and making sure I'm hitting my bases. And then maybe my module A or B, I can function with that one a little bit more, little by little. But it's so important. It's the foundation. So I would be full steam ahead trying to make sure I've got everything organized, mapped, everything's connected, sequential. I know that we've been uploading some resources on a unit outline template, and we used what was in the advanced syllabus as well as the NESA phases of learning. That's a really good approach for like week by week, flow in your actual unit of work. So please have a look at that. If you feel like this is still a bit up in the air for you, have a look at that on our socials. It's a bit more straightforward and clearer. Adriel and I are going to be producing a resource for advanced reading to write new syllabus. So keep a lookout on that. But ultimately, I think we need to be integrating the critical understanding with also the writing. So we want a combination here of critical and creative tasks. So if you lean a bit more on the Year 12 common module style, you're getting into that critical essay approach. And then when you're leaning on the more module C in the Year 12 and backward mapping from that, you're getting into those creative processes. Because I know that some schools kind of do one or the other in here. I think it's fine that your creative takes a bit more of a focus. All I'm saying is I don't think we should neglect the critical, because that's the understanding part. If they don't have the critical understanding, you often see that they're not able to also create something that's thoughtful and meaningful. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
I know you have some really good activities and strategies too.
Yeah, look, I think when we're looking at some of the ways we approach it, it goes back to just making sure that your kids are definitely understanding what they're in for in regards to the course. I think that's very important. So, you sort of mentioned promoting sort of the meta language, understanding the different sort of work levels required, additional reading. So really exposing them to like critical readings if you are presenting some of these lenses. So familiarizing students on something like Google Scholar, or getting a whole bunch of critical readings, which you might put together as a reader or something. There's teachers that have just gone through uni. You'll know that your uni professors and tutors and all that sort of stuff have all those readers for you. So you might do something like that, because remember, your advanced candidates are the ones that are there that need to stand out. And I definitely think that when you're establishing these skills nice and early for the reading to write unit, you are setting them off on the right tone. In terms of activities, I'm just going to harp on what I just mentioned at the beginning of today's sort of episode. Use this unit as a time where you will write with the students as well. So, do shared writing activities, use your whiteboard or your iPads or whatever it may be that you're using, but write with the kids so that they can see that you're on it as well. And you might be like, oh, but what if I'm scared? What if I do the wrong? Well, prepare beforehand. And these are the things that you should be preparing for as a teacher, I would say. We discussed this earlier in a few episodes ago, I think, where it's like, if you're worried about writing things on the spot, well, you're the teacher, you frame the lesson, you'll plan the lessons or the units, have your notes ready to go. And again, these are just some of the things that will help you in the classroom, especially in advanced. That's probably a big thing, because it is intimidating. It's daunting. I know personally, if you've got a teacher that's taught advanced English before and this is your first year doing it, you always have this sort of imposter syndrome or this inadequacy. And I'll just say this right from the beginning: you are not inadequate. You have gone through a uni degree. You have studied English. And if you are a keen and attentive sort of teacher of your craft, you will have asked those questions. And I'm sure that most of your more experienced teachers will be more than happy to help you along the way. Reach out, ask questions, don't be scared, you're not alone. So those are some of those big things that I would say is prepare and write with the kids. I think it's very, very important for teachers to be doing that. But look, some fantastic ideas. Thank you, Bill. Likewise, you have unpacked this syllabus really, really well. And like you mentioned, you have been busy working away on a few fantastic resources for our listeners and teachers and students alike that have been tuning into our Lit Happens podcast. We have so many more episodes to talk about. Like I said, we're already 42 episodes in, and looks like the sky's the limit in regards to this. But keep listening, guys. Keep reaching out. We appreciate all your support. Be sure, again, to just like and subscribe if you have been listening on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're tuning into us. As I did mention, Belle has been busy working away on some fantastic resources, which we will have up and running soon as well. So keep an ear out and look at all our socials as to when they will be coming out. Thank you once again, Belle, for such a wonderful breakdown of today's episode. And thank you to all our supporters out there. We'll be talking about many more things to come in the weeks ahead.